The inspiration for the Jack Tyrrell thrillers came about during an annual reread of my favorite book, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I wanted to write a thriller, but I wanted to write a character who undergoes a deeply spiritual journey, as Dickens wrote for Ebenezer Scrooge. Suddenly, the first 3 Tyrrell books popped into my head, as did my hero, Jack Tyrrell, an extraordinarily capable man who has to overcome his demons by righting wrongs and helping others, with a little assist from the other side. I've never had that kind of immediate inspiration strike in my whole career. In the very first paragraph of the whole series, Tyrrell's wife Maggie is murdered by the mafia in retribution for Tyrrell's failure to deliver on a bribe. He spirals into heavy drinking and scaring people into paying their not-so-legal debts. On the 5th anniversary of his wife's death, Maggie's ghost appears to Jack, just as Marley's ghost appears to Scrooge. Maggie has interceded with the chairman, as God is called in these novels, to give Tyrrell a second chance. Maggie arranges for Jack to meet Harry, his spiritual guide, who introduces him to the people who need his help. Jack will become a righter of wrongs. This introduction mirrors Marley's introduction of the spirits of Christmas past, present, and yet to come. But for Jack, there's a catch. After he helps someone, they will never remember him. And there are no guarantees of success or survival. Jack has to be completely selfless. Fortunately for Jack, being completely selfless doesn't mean that wonderful things don't happen in his life. And the most wonderful of all is meeting Kim Gannon, the woman he's going to build the rest of his life with, assuming he lives that long.
It was my fault that my wife was murdered right in the front steps of our home. I was shot too and almost killed. I deserved it. Maggie did not. We were walking home from a movie, a romantic comedy. Maggie thought it was fun. I hated it. But I was in such a foul mood those days that I could have gone to a double feature of Casablanca and played again. Sam and hated them both. No matter what I saw or did, I would have hated it because I hated myself. I was a U.S. Marshal, and I accepted a bribe. There you have it. The unvarnished ugliness at the core of my being. Despite years of service with the Marshals, and before that in the U.S. Army Special Forces, I had taken money from some loathsome criminals who planned to kill other loathsome criminals who happened to be in the Marshal Service's Witness Protection Program. And please don't think I just jumped up and say, sure, I'll take your money. I wasn't that easy. Like a lot of us, a lot of veterans returning from Afghanistan or Iraq, I suffered from PTSD. And like a lot of us, I had a hard time admitting that I had a problem and seeking help for it. Instead of therapy, I drank. I drank a lot. I hung out in bars that catered to federal agents of all sorts. DEA, FBI, Treasury, and Marshals. Just as they are bars for feds, they are bars for cops and bad guys. Both good guys and bad guys are aware of this. It makes it easier for law enforcement to find suspects in bad guy bars. At the same time, it's easy for the criminal element to identify those in law enforcement who might be approachable regarding bribery. Odds are that at least one federal agent who gets soused on a regular basis is susceptible to an offer of easy money. And since I was avoiding therapy, which was bitterly ironic since my wife was a therapist, I self-medicated with booze in the same place most nights. Dugan's pub. Instead of going home to Maggie, I told her I was working late on the case. I often did work late, and she believed me. Now that I think about it, she probably was pretending to believe me. It was a lie of convenience that we shared. If I was honest with myself, something that was in the difficult of extreme, I had to admit she had tried to help me. Suggestions that we go for long walks where there would be nothing to do but admire the scenery and talk. Suggestions that we drive into the country, admire the scenery and talk. Suggestions that we spend home on a lovely evening, listening to music and talking. Maggie had a mischievous sense of humor and a great line of flirtation. But heaven forbid we should just talk. For crying out loud, she was a therapist. She was a caring and concerned person. She would have figured out what a mess I was, and I couldn't have that. Well, the first few times Dummy G approached me about passing information to him, I waved them off with an obscenity or two. But I didn't report his offer to my supervisors, which is what you're supposed to do when criminals attempt to bribe you. He continued to proposition me to do him a favor. My cursing must have been losing its effectiveness because he repeated his offer again and again. One night I pushed my $20 bill across the bar. And the bartender pointed in Dominic's direction and told me that Dominic was buying. I should have left the 20 and paid for my own drinks. Told Dominic where to go and informed my superiors. Eventually, I slid down the slippery slope of immorality. I rationalized that it was okay to accept the bribe. I didn't work in witness protection, so I couldn't actually deliver the information and portray the Marshal service. And sure, I occasionally delivered the witness protection subjects, many of them criminals to a handler. But the path to their actual ultimate destination, their newfound lives of comfort and security, had several steps. I was just a way station in the process. But after delivery, I hadn't had a clue what happened to them. It was impossible for me to give the momsters what they wanted. So if I took the bribe, I'd just be stealing from some very, very bad people. Didn't seem particularly immoral to me. The elephant in this particular room of my drunken head was that Dominic and company wouldn't appreciate being ripped off by me. But I dismissed these fears. I survived the war in Afghanistan, and a couple of momsters didn't frighten me. Besides, were they really stupid enough to risk the inevitable manhunt that would follow the whacking of a law enforcement officer? The deal was $50,000 up front with another 50 when I handed over the information. One night I met Dominic a couple of blocks from my usual bar. He handed me a plain white shopping bag with a shoebox inside and walked off without another word. The bag felt heavier than a pair of shoes. $50,000 in 100s is a bit bulky. I felt very pleased with myself for having earned that much money by lying to criminals. Very pleased. For about 5 minutes, it hit me. It hit me that I had dishonored everything that I ever stood for as a marshal, a soldier, and a husband. Everything that my wife believed about me. I couldn't live with myself or with my wife who cares so much about others. She had become a therapist whose sense of humor was sly and surprising, who had brown hair, blue eyes, and a small scar over her left eye from a childhood fall from a bike. Maggie was disproportionately self-conscious about that little scar. She shouldn't have worried. It was barely noticeable. She was so beautiful. After the movie, we had walked along West 76th Street, heading west away from Columbus Avenue and toward our home on the third floor of a brownstone. The June night was pleasantly warm. A light breeze rustled the leaves, and we strolled down the sidewalk hand in hand. It had taken every bit of mental fortitude I possessed not to yank mine from hers. It was beyond me why she would want to hold my hand. Yes, the same hand that I had taken the bribe with. It had also been impossible for me to enjoy a stroll on the wonderful June evening when I was spending most of my mental energy scanning every doorway, every window, every rooftop, wondering if someone was about to kill me. I had been stupid and immoral enough to take money from a criminal scum and reneging on my deal with the scum that left me in a state of fear. Not to mention the phone call I had received earlier that day. I picked up the phone and said, "Hello?" A man's voice replied, "Well, we're waiting." As we had climbed up the stoop to our building, Maggie released my hand and fished in her purse for her keys. There was a noise. Like the tearing of a piece of paper. In a fraction of a second, something smashed into my right shoulder and slammed me against the doorframe. As I fell, another something hit my leg. There was a distant sound of footsteps pounding away, slowly fading out of hearing. I lay on my back, sprawled on the landing at the top of the stoop, breathing hard. I touched my shoulder and felt the jagged tear of my shirt and skin. My fingers came away covered in blood. I gazed up and realized that the glass in the door was broken. Where was Maggie? I slowly rolled to my stomach until I could see down the stoop. She was crumbled at the bottom legs on the sidewalk, her torso on the steps, all of her covered in blood. Her head lay on one of the stone steps, her face towards me, her eyes wide open and sightless. I tried to call her name but couldn't collect enough breath to make a sound. She couldn't be dead. She couldn't. The bullets were meant for me. I had taken the bribe, but never delivered. This was payback for me. What had I done to my Maggie? My breathing was more strained as I pushed myself over the edge of the landing and down the steps. Every nerve in my body screamed with pain. I rolled down the last steps and came to an uncontrolled stop with my head in her lap. She didn't move. I reached out and took her hand, gave it a gentle squeeze. Nothing. I whispered her name. No answer. The sound of sirens filled the air. And I blacked out.